Well, howdy again, everybody. I wanted to take just a few minutes to show you my newish setup for feeding cubes to the cattle. And you've seen the video I had with the Trip Hopper Jr., which was a in the bed container that I put about 300 pounds of cubes in the back of the Kawasaki mule I have. And that got to be a little bit cumbersome because you got to lift those sacks up and fill it each time. And so I'll tell you a story here in just a second, but I want to show you this rig and go through it with you. So stay tuned. I have a good friend named Ricky Lloyd who owns the business next to my horse hospital that makes fertilizer beds and manufactures other things. And he comes over to the clinic every morning just before 8 o'clock before I get my day started, and we sit down and drink a cup of coffee and tell a few stories and mainly talk about cattle. He's got a herd of cattle about an hour north of me where he lives. And so we were talking back last fall about feeding cubes to the cattle, and he said, why don't you buy one of those big trailer trip hoppers that you pull behind your pickup, and you can load it with 1.5 tons, 3,000 pounds of cubes, go to the local co-op, which is only about 4 to 5 miles from my clinic. So we just pull on down the freeway to the co-op, go underneath the big overhead bin. They load the trip hopper for me, and there's enough cubes in there to last me about 2 weeks before I need to refill it. And I said, oh man, there's no way I can buy that. That thing costs way too much money. And over the last few years that he's gotten to know us, he's been teasing my wife all the time that he said, man, your husband sure works hard. And he says, you know, your next husband's really going to enjoy how hard your husband now works. And he just gets that silly little grin on his face. Well, my wife grins and she laughs about it. Well, he started telling me that my wife's next husband is going to wear a ponytail and flip-flops, and he's going to have a sea boat and a freshwater boat, and he will never have to work a day in his life because I've worked so hard. So I was telling him, he suggested the trip hopper trailer model, and I said, well, there's no way I'm going to spend that kind of money on that. And he looked at me dead serious and he said, well, it's either that or a jet ski for the new husband. Well, that solved it for me right there. That weekend I went and bought this trailer. So I'm glad I did. It's a well-made trailer. Like I said, it holds 3,000 pounds of cubes. And I'll show you here where you can contact them. They've got a lot of different models. They've got some 1,500 pound bed mounted models for a pickup truck. They've got the Trip Hopper Jr., which I showed you in a video here a year or so ago. And then this model, and this model is remote controlled. I've got a key fob up here hanging from my mirror. And all I do is when I get out in the pasture, I press on. I count how many clicks I'm going to feed, and then push off when I'm done. And it's charged by this battery. I charge this battery about once every 6 weeks probably, and you can tell when it's getting a little low, it starts putting out feed just a little bit slower. But it's run by this motor, and all that mechanism opens this trap door so that when you open the door, it drops cubes on the ground. And you set it inside here for 3 pounds or 4 pounds, however many pounds of cubes you want it to dump at each dump. And so then you just drive through the pasture, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that here in just a minute. you they count the cycles of the trip hopper, and you can tell how many pounds of feed you put out. So today I'm going to put out about 250 pounds of feed for these cows and calves, and I'll count to, I don't know what it is, 60 or 65 clicks, and I will put out the right amount. They've made a ladder right here on the side of this, and allows you to get up to the top where you can open the bin up there that I'll show you here in just a minute. And that is very convenient, very sturdily built. This thing pulls down the freeway at 70 miles an hour and you don't even know it's on. So when you crawl up on the top of the ladder, I stand on the about the third rung up, but it gives you plenty good visualization of the top of the trip hopper. You can see the large cover that slides back so that you can drive under the big overhead bin to fill it up. And so they've got this bungee cord strap there. Open it up and you got your cubes. And I'm telling you, this is really, really nice, and it really simplifies what I do. I typically leave the trip hopper hooked to the Kubota, and so I'm ready to roll. It's very easy to unhook, and I'll show you that here in just a second. So I carry a block in the back of the Kubota, put a little handle on it. Makes it easy to throw it underneath the jack. All you got to do is pull this pin. That rotates down, and then you just jack it up. It's got a bulldog hitch on it. You flip this down to pull this collar back. That springs apart, and then you just jack this thing off the Kubota, and then very easy to then back up with the pickup and drop it on the pickup and take off. It's got safety chains. I don't put them on when I'm driving through the pasture. It does not have lights, so I'm not sure what this is for. Never used it. Probably if the remote goes out, you can hook it up to the lights on your pickup, or the Kubota, if we had that's hooked up like that. So this is quite the rig, and I really, really, really like it. Again, simplified my life. I don't have to lift those 50-pound sacks anymore, and I'm able to fill it up enough cubes in there to last me about 2 weeks before I need to refill it. So let's go put out some cubes. Cattle are quite interesting in that once they hear that Kubota start up, they recognize that engine, and they start thinking they're going to potentially get some cubes. So if they're within earshot, they're going to head towards that sound. And I just started the Kubota up across the road. My wife's filming here, but they hear that Kubota engine, that diesel engine, and again, they're really paying attention. Now, that's one reason I like to have two different UTVs. I feed with the Kubota because it's heavier duty and can pull the trip hopper with the 3,000 pounds of cubes in it. And then I do a lot of my knocking around day to day in a Kawasaki Mule, only because when that engine starts, they're not conditioned to it and assume that they're going to get fed, so they don't come running from whatever pasture they're in. And obviously on a big place, that wouldn't be much of a problem. And a lot of times you're driving in a pickup, pulling the trip hopper on these bigger places instead of going short distances like I'm doing with the Kubota. But you can see they want to mob you, and that's one important thing about feeding cubes. If you're feeding just a few head of cows, you'll probably be okay putting it out with the sack. And I've done it that way for years. But I've become aware of several people that I've been associated with that have been hurt pretty bad by cattle trying to feed them out of a sack. And it's not the cows running over the top of you that are near to you, it's the cattle at the back of the pack that are pushing the cattle in the front of the pack as they're trying to get to the cubes, and they'll push those cattle into you and over you. And there's been some people hurt really bad doing that. So from a safety perspective, using some kind of mechanized feeder is helpful to keep you from getting hurt. And with larger groups of cattle, you can't put it out fast enough with a sack that you're going to be able to keep them from mobbing you and potentially running over the top of you. So I really like this little system. This trailer has definitely made my life easier. I don't have to lift any sacks of feed anymore. It's weatherproof. It can be left out in the rain, and the sliding top does not allow rain to get in there. I usually park it under my little carport shed, so it's not an issue for me either way. But it's a very, very well made trailer. It's heavy duty, and then, like I said before, you can run down the highway at 70 miles an hour and it pulls really well. There's no bounce to it, whether it's empty or loaded, and it's just a very solidly constructed piece of equipment. So I'm not getting paid by these folks to promote their product, but I can tell you I've owned both the Trip Hopper Junior and the trailer now, and I just think they make some really good equipment. I'm sure there's other vendors that have equally good equipment, but in our country this one's really popular, and our local producers cooperative feed store, this is what they carry the most of, and just talking to people around in my area, it's the one that's most durable. So you can see it's putting out little piles of, I've got it set at 4 pounds per dump, and it'll dump that pile of cubes, and it spreads it out so those cattle can get to it without having to fight for space and try to get their fair share. So that's what I wanted to share with you, and I hope this adds to your thought processes with regard to planning for convenience and safety. And I want to thank you for riding along with me. Have a blessed day and a good week to come. Thank you.